My quick summary on how Hawaii became part of the United States. So the background of this, the first interest in Hawaii from the United States is actually sending missionaries to Hawaii to convert them to Christianity. But what's interesting about that is sort of every subsequent generation of those missionaries, and as there are more United States or people who identify themselves as United States citizens in Hawaii, they start to stray from the missionary, bring God to the Hawaiians, to more lucrative practices like, for example, planting sugar. And so the ultimate motive behind the annexation of Hawaii is going to be sugar. You're going to see pineapples later in the slide, but business and capitalism at that. And so what really starts to drive this is in 1875 we see the first tariff put on sugar by the United States, which means that obviously those who are planting sugar in Hawaii are losing money by that tariff. In 1890 the United States raises that tariff, and that's what really gets the ball rolling. And the group behind all this is called the Hawaiian League. And it's led by this man here, Lawrence Thurston. It's a secret society, and so they were about 400, 405, I've seen in my study of Americans and also some other immigrants who want to overthrow the Hawaiian government. Of course, this wasn't their stated purpose, and it was a secret society, but they realized that if they become part of the United States, they don't have to pay those tariffs, which would be a good thing, and they also despise the monarchy. So what they do is they team up with a group called the Honolulu Rifles. And this is a Hawaiian militia who is supposedly loyal to the crown. But we see some of the members of the Hawaiian League are also part of the Honolulu Rifles. I guess you can't seem to separate Americans from their guns. And anyway, the Hawaiian League purchases the Honolulu Rifles to help them overthrow the king. And this is the king here. And eventually what happens is the Honolulu Rifles combine with the Hawaiian League. They get together. And they force the king to make some reforms in favor of the Hawaiian League and the international presence in Hawaii. So what they want is they want to be able to protect their own private property where they're making all their money off of sugar, pineapple, whatever, at the same time that they want to be able to have a say in the government. So let me make this abundantly clear. Hawaii was a parliamentary monarchy. So yes, they had a king, but they also had a parliament that was democratically elected, which is important to note because obviously America always says it believes in democracy, and one would think that they wouldn't invade another democratic country, but that would be proved wrong in this case. So anyway, so they allow themselves extended power to vote, and they make the requirements for Native Hawaiians to vote a little bit more strict on property requirements, financial requirements. And so as I was saying earlier, there's about 400 members in the Hawaiian League, and just to give you some perspective on that, there's about 40,000 Native Hawaiians. And so the vote, eventually when we see our first vote after all this, it's about 14,000 people who participate. So obviously they're restricting the right to vote, protecting their property, and then getting themselves into government. So the king is sort of, by the nature of this, called the Bayonet Constitution, you can assume that obviously this was forced on the king by this forceful display by the Honolulu Rifles and the Hawaiian League. And so they force the king to put members of the league into his cabinet, and they say that he can't remove those without Parliament's approval, so that it's more likely that they will stay in government and be able to affect change in favor of the Hawaiian League. Actually, the king actually dies at age 54 of a kidney disease. And that leads us with his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, who is going to be the monarch in power of Hawaii when this transfer of power occurs. And she's very against the Bayonet Constitution. So of course she's sworn in as the new queen, and she's swears to uphold it because that was the constitution that was signed by the king when he was forced by bayonets. So she swears to uphold that, but she has a plan of her own. And so she also has written a new constitution that she wants to sign, and she has this whole big event for it. And her own sort of advisors, her own cabinet's like, oh, I don't know if you want to do that. Obviously, because the Honolulu Rifles, Hawaiian League are very active, and they want to have they protect their own interests, really. So what happens is when the Hawaiian League hears about this, they create a committee of safety, which is composed of about 13 men of the Hawaiian League, who are starting to figure out, well, what do we do about this queen who wants to get rid of our reforms and wants to get rid of us in general? Obviously, this parallels the French Revolution, if you remember the Committee of Public Safety and Robespierre, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, so Thurston, Lawrence Thurston, the guy we were talking about earlier, sort of the leader of all this, the most radical, the guy pulling the strings in the backstage, he heads off to Washington, D.C. to talk to Benjamin Harrison about potentially annexing Hawaii. And Benjamin Harrison is actually views this favorably and says, you would have a friend in D.C. if anything happens. At the same time, he meets the diplomat from the United States, whose name is John Stevens, who says, similarly gives him sort of a favorable review. He says, if America's property or Americans' lives or property are threatened, I will land Marines off of the USS Boston, which is conveniently stationed in Hawaii, to protect those interests. So with that support, Thurston and his Committee of Safety, as well as obviously the Honolulu Rifles and the League members, stormed the palace on January 17, 1893. And you see a picture of the Royal Guard surrendering their arms there. They actually get really lucky. When they go to storm the palace, there happens to be a police stop happening right on that main strip, where a wagon that was carrying weapons actually for this raid here was pulled over by police, and the person who was driving the wagon shot the cop in the shoulder. So the police and what you're looking at, the Royal Guard that was on alert that day, that was watching the rifles and carefully maintaining, they're doing their job really. We're all sidetracked, and sort of the group that overthrew the monarchy this day sort of stormed in with no one watching because of this incident that happened right outside. And so the cop that was shot there was sort of the only bloodshed of this overthrow, because the Queen didn't want any more bloodshed. So Lulukalani abdicated, which means she relinquished her power and turned it over to a provisional government. And this provisional government was led by not Thurston, he was a little radical for even his own people there. It was a man named Stanford Dole, who's the cousin of the Dole pineapple fortune that we still have today, as you can see from the slide. So they set up this provisional government, and the first thing they do is they send word to America that they want to be annexed. And America's sort of involvement in this itself actually comes from Stevens did, as he said, send Marines to protect the property lives of the Americans there. So there was about 260, I want to say, Marines who were landed from the USS Boston who were in Honolulu, really close to the palace. And so Lulukalani felt like she had been betrayed rather by the Americans. And so what happens is so this provisional government immediately sends a letter to Washington seeking annexation, but obviously, as you know, Harrison lost the election in 1892, and we have Grover Cleveland in the White House, who conducts a study, and it actually puts together a commission to study what happened here, which eventually says that Stevens was part of this insurrection. The Marines he sent were not actually to protect people, they were part of this overthrow. And so Congress votes and says, no, we're not going to accept Hawaii as a territory, U.S. territory. And it isn't until 1898 that finally occurs, and it's during the Spanish-American War when William McKinley, as president of Congress, eventually says, it'd be great to have Hawaii for a naval base, and obviously for economic reasons during a war, it'd be nice to have that. And so sort of when the country is sort of sidetracked and very nationalistic during the Spanish-American War, the Congress sort of votes to take over Hawaii during that process. So 1893 obviously was the overthrow. That provisional government lasts long enough till 1898 for America to take it in as a territory. We don't actually get Hawaii as a state till 1959. It takes a long time. We get Alaska and Hawaii in 59 as formal states. So it's an American territory for a long time. When eventually we do annex Hawaii, Grover Cleveland, who was against it first and put the study together and persuaded Congress to vote against it, said, quote, "I am ashamed of the whole affair." And it isn't until President William Clinton is in office that he finally issues a formal apology to the people of Hawaii for America's role in that overthrow. And as you learned last night from your homework, there are a lot of groups who are still pushing for independence of Hawaii.